I wanted to show that within the Indian Army, there is nothing like a surname. Uniform is bigger than any caste, creed. See, Test Case again was a story that the challenge of a female coming into an all male world was a new theme that we thought that could be interesting. We got an opportunity through the OTT world to try and figure out different worlds of the army. And when you're telling a real story, like for example in Avrodh season 2, we picked up the story of Major Pradeep Arya, who's a real character. Income tax officer, be an army officer. People didn't even know that. They thought that we had just come up with some fiction and हमने वो बना दिया था.
Hi and welcome to midday.com. Joining us today, we have a special guest who's a former journalist from our fraternity, of course, and a filmmaker as well, Samar Khan. Hi.
Thank you for having me. And yes, I don't think I'm a former journalist. Once a journalist, always a journalist. So
True. Yeah,
that
that's
always
true.
remains a part of your DNA.
True, absolutely.
But thank you very much for having me.
So one of your initial films, Shaurya, had an army officer accused of killing his commanding officer. So how did that come about? How did that project happen?
See, I'll tell, my army connection actually goes back to my growing up years, and I've said this many times that I was part of the National Defense Academy, and I was asked to leave for indiscipline about 6 days before my passing out parade. So that was quite a story in
Okay.
itself. So I've always had a fascination with the army, and Shaurya actually happened because it was a story that I wanted to tell. It was a story of identity. You know, the story was about a person who refuses to defend himself because he believes that he has already been, he will already be perceived guilty because of the surname that he has. So that was the story. I wanted to show that within the Indian Army, there is nothing like a surname. And if you are innocent, you are innocent. And the uniform is bigger than any caste, creed, or any kind of differentiation. So army still remains, touchwood, one of those institutions, the armed forces, whether it's the army, navy, or the air force. It remains one of those institutions where you're equal to everybody. So that was the idea from which the film was born. And I was lucky enough that I found producers like Mozaber and actors who were wanting to be a part of it, and I think the film got made.
And now being a producer yourself, of course, you have been very encouraging of the same theme, which is the Indian Armed Force. So, like, say even a show like Test Case, which nobody expected would be the huge success that it was. It was quite a surprise with Nimrat, of course, taking the lead, and Nagesh Kupnur as well. So, if you'd like to tell us about what went into that.
See, Test Case again was a story that came to my head because at that point of time there was conversation happening of allowing female officers to come into the armed forces, and the armed forces opening its door to female officers. And the army till then had been a pretty male-dominated, male bastion, so as to say. So the challenge of a female coming into an all-male world was a new theme that we thought that could be interesting. And I had written the script, and once I had written the script, at that time OTT was just about brand new. It had just started and nobody knew what this industry will be all about. I actually wanted to make it into a film, and I was interested in directing it also. So then when I met Ekta Kapoor, and she said, would you be okay for us to make a web series out of it? And I was like, okay, I mean, if that's what it is, then maybe that's the route to go and make a web series out of it. And, we got Nimrat on board, we got Nagesh on board, then we got Vinay Vaikul to direct the balance episodes. And it turned out to be, I think, because it was a unique story and it was a unique world, and the world that the people had not seen too much at that point of time. I think that was the reason why it became successful. And obviously, Nimrit was a big star at that time, and she had just done Homeland, and everybody knew about Homeland, and she was a well-known name. So she brought in a lot of the audiences, and she brought in a lot of people. So yeah, I think Test Case was the first show that I did, which was centered around the army, and then the journey after that continued.
Yeah, and of course, we can't not mention Code M as well, which has just had its second season.
Yeah, it's had its second, and
Yeah.
touchwood by hope. I mean, we are hoping that we'll have a third season. Then Kodam happened, then Avrodh happened, so Kodam also actually was, see, for me, I think the what I was fascinated about was the fact that the OTT platforms were giving us an opportunity to tell us stories which were not just about war.
Yeah.
They were not just about one operation, or they were not just about a Sher Shah is fit for a film because it's one operation, and you can tell the story of an operation. But we got an opportunity through the OTT world to try and figure out different worlds of the army, and even for the audiences to realize that the army is not just about going and fighting on the border. There is an intelligence wing that works. There is a communication department that works. There is a signals department. There is the engineers. So different kinds of people make up the army. So there are so many stories about people and about things that happen in the armed forces, that Codem was another extension of telling a story about someone from military intelligence wanting to investigate a killing that happens. Then in second season, we took up the whole idea of corruption in defense deals and how that affects our armed forces and that affects our soldiers. And so we are trying to bring up certain relevant topics or certain relevant things. And I'm not saying that we are sending a message across, but I think these are things that should be part of conversation and should be a part of people talking about it. I mean, whether this whole debate that goes on of whether the armed forces should recognize homosexuality or not is a debate.
Correct.
Now, there are no rights and wrongs to it, and there is no right answer to say it should be done or it should not be done. But it's a debate, and I think we should all take part in that debate and give our points of view, and let's see how the world then progresses from there. So the idea behind these shows was essentially to maybe start a debate or start a conversation, but also tell good stories.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And of course, both your shows, whether it's Test Case or Codem, have women at the forefront, which is also so important because usually we associate, when we
Army
think
with
of the armed,
men.
yeah,
Yeah, so that was, I think, a conscious decision that we took, and I think the platform also was very supportive of that, where we said that our protagonists should be women. And even if you see Shoorveer, the latest show that Juggernaut has just produced, and it's gone on Disney Hotstar, we have very important female characters in that. We have Regina, who's playing an Air Force pilot. We have Anjali Barot, who's playing a chopper pilot. So I think gender equality is an important part of storytelling, and we should, as storytellers, break the prototype of you thinking in your head that this is what the army is or this is what the Air Force is. It is it's got diversity, it's multi-dimensional, and there are women who play very, very important roles and they have very important parts to play. So why not? And you also get an opportunity then to work with wonderful actors like Nimrit or with Jennifer or with the Regina or with an Anjali, who bring a different dimension
yeah.
to your stories.
Yeah, and I'm sure each of these projects involves a lot of research. It's not, like obviously
It
we
does,
can't,
yeah.
yeah. So if you'd like to share some of those experiences, I'm sure it's pretty fascinating for the common people who are not exposed to that.
It's very. I think it's when you meet people and you hear their stories. I remember that when we started Avrodh season 1, which was about the surgical strikes, and we got a chance to speak to the gentleman who had actually carried out those surgical strikes. You suddenly get to know so many things that you take for granted, and you get to know so many things about their lives that you don't even know and you take for granted. So it was an opportunity to meet these people. It's an opportunity to hear from them, and you have to keep the research very tight, and you have to keep the research very authentic, because these are real stories.
True.
And when you're telling a real story, like for example in Avrodh season 2, we picked up the story of Major Pradeep Arya, who's a real character. And there are lots of people on Twitter who came back and said, how can a income tax officer be an army officer? People didn't even know that. They thought that we had just come up with some fiction and हमने वो बना दिया था. But it's actually true. He's part of the territorial army. A lot of people don't know what the territorial army is. So we opened up the fact and said, okay, there is something called the territorial army. It is a part of the armed forces. A person can volunteer to be part of the territorial army. Plus, he's a income tax officer. So his life, listening to him, meeting officers. So another show that we did, for Epic from Juggernaut was Regiment Diaries. Now, that show is a fascinating show because every episode is a history of every regiment of the Indian Army. Yeah. And that research fascinates you because you get to know so many stories, you get to know so many people, you get to know the lives that they lead, you get to know about their history, their culture, the little things that make them soldiers. It's really fascinating and I think every Indian out there should try and read, and if you can't read, then just watch Regiment Diaries. It's got everything in it. So I'm plugging my show. So just watch Regiment Diaries, because these stories are really fascinating stories of people who, you know, you think will are okay, ठीक है, आपने सिर्फ सुना है कि यार कारगिल में ये लोग मर गए थे और ये 10 लोगों ने हमारी जान दे दी, एंड हम एक थम्स अप कर देते हैं या ट्विटर पे जाके बोल देते हैं RIP salute to them. But if you read about how that operation was planned, what goes into, and that's the same thing we try and bring on our shows, whether it's Avrodh 1 or it's Avrodh 2, the planning that goes behind it, the kind of training that people go behind it, how the government and the army collaborate to do an operation, what are the problems they face, how does, I mean, it's obviously that, you know, our enemies are also smart, how do they outsmart each other. So it's a very, very fascinating world, and I think the research in it is the most fascinating part of it, because it gives you so much new material, it gives you so many new stories, it gives you so many new insights that you're like, wow, I wish I could like do many more stories about the armed forces, and because there are so many stories.
Absolutely, I'm sure. And like you said, especially when it's about a real person. So how do you take that call about how much to dramatize it and how much to?
I guess that depends on the person, and I have always said this to people that, you know, truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
And what happens in their life and what happens in their lives is truly fascinating. So if I was to ever tell you that I'm telling a fictional story about an income tax officer who's also an army officer, you would look at me and say it's not even possible.
Yeah.
How can an income tax officer be an army officer and go and fight terrorists? यार आप तो झूठ बोल रहे हो, आप तो ऐसे ही बोल रहे हो, आप तो ये मन घड़त कहानी है. But ये truth है. तो मेरे को, we don't have to work really hard on trying to dramatize it, because these are real people and their incidents and their stories are so fascinating that you don't have to actually dramatize too much. You just have to make certain changes, because obviously you're telling a story and, you know, you need certain things that have to fit into your storytelling. But it's actually not much, if you ask me. There's a lot that we picked up from real life, and even when you're making a fictional show like Shoorveer, which is a pure fiction show, but because of the fact that I know real Air Force pilots, I know real army officers, when you talk to them, when I meet my friends or other people from the armed forces, their stories are so fascinating that you don't need to actually fictionalize too much. It's all there.
And of course, we have Independence Day approaching. And of course, we'd love for people to be patriotic every day, not just that one day. But if there's any message that you would like to give
I
viewers.
just feel that I just feel that, you know, Independence Day is a chance, and I am not going to shy away from the fact that everybody turns around and says that, you know, we should have patriotism every day. Sure, we should. But there should be a day when everybody collectively decides and says, I want to pray for my country, I want to bless my country. It's the same reason we go to a temple.
Yeah.
We can all pray at home, but we go to a temple because there's so much of positivity in that particular place. We go to a mosque because people come with positivity. So on Independence Day, I think everybody should just, the one thing everybody should take a pledge and vow is that just be a good citizen. Because if everyone is a good citizen, we will have no evil.
Exactly.
If everybody just pays their taxes, everybody, you know, keeps their neighborhood clean, if everybody takes pride in their country, that's enough. And I don't think patriotism is anything more than just taking pride in your country. And your country is the city that you live in, is the locality that you live in, and the house that you live in. We are all one. So yes, please, you know, the Prime Minister has gone out and said, let's put a flag in every house. Please do that. But don't forget that Independence Day ke baad bhi, your responsibility doesn't end. As an Indian, you have a responsibility every day to be just a good citizen. So if you're a good citizen,
And also, we love to hear about your upcoming projects. If there's anything you would be able to reveal.
there's actually quite a bit that we are working on, but like I said, we are all bound by confidentiality agreements, which we signed, which we cannot reveal. But there will be more stories from the armed forces. There will be more stories from other parts of the world. And I think we at Juggernaut are very, very focused on telling good stories. We want to tell good stories. We want to tell stories that connect with people. So that's what the next year is going to be all about. You know, good stories is what we are looking for. So if anybody has good stories, please send them to us. We'll be more than happy to, you know, hear them, listen to them, and make shows out of them. So yeah, good stories is what we want to tell for the next year, and we have projects in the pipeline. So touch wood, I think in a couple of months you'll get to hear about them.
And it was lovely having you.
Lovely
And
having
best
you,
of
and
luck
thank
for
you
all
very
your
much, and happy
projects.
Independence to you, and happy Independence Day, guys, to everybody. Let's just make this a great country because we have the potential. We're on the path. So just be a good citizen, and we'll be a great country.
Subscribe to Midday India. Get direct notifications on all our videos by clicking on the bell icon.